Can the New Orleans Saints actually win the sweepstakes for Odell Beckham Jr.? What film notes and film study had to say about the Saints' Week 9 loss? And Doug Mouton joined to talk about what happens with Odell Beckham Jr., what happens without Odell Beckham Jr., and what has to happen next week for a win in Tennessee. We had all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all platforms for you, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, Canal Street Chronicles, Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our good friends over at McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's is more than just a place to get a tasty, affordable meal. They're an unofficial community center, so we thank McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. And you know what else I'm loving? I'm loving the fact that somehow or another, the New Orleans Saints are reportedly finalists in the running for Odell Beckham Jr., the free agent wide receiver, a free agent for the first time in his career. Other finalists include the Kansas City Chiefs, who had a Super Bowl appearance just a year ago and were Super Bowl champions the year before that. The Green Bay Packers, who were the NFC champion contenders for last year's Super Bowl run. And you've also got the New England Patriots that are kind of in there, and then the Seattle Seahawks that are kind of in there and being mentioned as well. But the fact that the New Orleans Saints are contenders here at this point speaks volumes of what the New Orleans Saints organization represents to players as opportunity across the NFL. We really should have a conversation about what the New Orleans Saints represent as opportunity for Odell Beckham Jr. and why Odell Beckham Jr. might choose to go elsewhere or choose the New Orleans Saints. So let's do a little bit of a pros and cons list. We're going to help Odell Beckham Jr. out here. And in the midst of the pros and cons list, yes, I'm going to try to sell the New Orleans Saints to Odell Beckham Jr. So why don't we start off with cons? That way we can end on a good note, as we often try to do here on the show. So let's start off with the cons. Look, if Odell Beckham Jr. wants to get a paycheck, potentially get a ring, basically get volume up against secondary defensive coverage, if he wants to stay healthy by doing the least to hopefully return the most, then he should probably go to a place like Green Bay where he can line up opposite Davante Adams, who's going to draw primary coverage, and, have a running back like Aaron Jones in the backfield. He should probably go to a place like Kansas City where he's going to be lined up across from Tyreek Hill and also, in the mix with McCall Hardman as well as Travis Kelce. They don't really have a run game in Kansas City, but you have all of these passing options. So if the idea for Odell Beckham Jr. is to walk into a place, potentially walk out with a ring and sign a contract next season, then maybe places like Green Bay and Kansas City make a lot more sense. He also gets the opportunity to play with, I guess this would be point number 6, play with elite quarterback talent. I mean, you look at the quarterbacks that are on this list, you have Patrick Mahomes, you've got Aaron Rodgers, you've got Russell Wilson on this list, and then you've got Trevor Siemian and you've got Mac Jones. So the Saints not the worst in that situation as opposed to the rookie quarterback in New England, but you really get an opportunity to play with elite quarterback talent like Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers if you go to one of those other two places that are considered finalists like Kansas City as well as Green Bay. Matt LaFleur, Aaron Rodgers, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. If you come to New Orleans, you're getting Sean Payton, Trevor Siemian, and Taysom Hill. Now, the difference here is that Sean Payton has showed that he can win with just about any quarterback that's out there. Now, Trevor Siemian, very close to having a W in his first start since 2019 because of Sean Payton, but unfortunately, they had those drops early on in the first half that didn't allow them to build the early momentum. Defense couldn't hold up at the end of the game there to maintain the lead that Trevor Siemian had stormed back from an 18-point deficit with. So let's not say that Trevor Siemian is the worst option on the board here, because he is bolstered a bit by, of course, Sean Payton. So, okay, there you go. We got some of the cons out of the way. Now, let's look at some of the pros. This is where we're going to try to sell Odell Beckham Jr. on New Orleans. If you're looking for volume, homie, there's no better place to go. It's very simple. There's no other place to go. You just saw Trevor Siemian throw 41 passes in this last game. which was more than what you saw from Jameis Winston. Yes, Jameis Winston can get the ball down the field better than Trevor Siemian, but if the Saints are going to move ahead with Trevor Siemian, they're not shy to throw the ball with him. And do you think they're going to be shy to throw the ball with Odell Beckham Jr. as their primary receiving option? Absolutely not. So that's definitely something. It's a wide receiver-friendly team as well as a wide receiver-friendly system. And I mean that from two different perspectives. Let's start off with wide receiver-friendly team. Think back to last year. As the season was coming to an end, Emmanuel Sanders had a receptions incentive in his contract, and Sean Payton went out there and force-fed Emmanuel Sanders to make sure he got his payday, made sure he got his paycheck. That's big, and that's something about being a wide receiver-friendly team. You look at them being a wide receiver-friendly system, and you can look at Deontay Harris as the sort of the shining star here. By all intents and purposes, what we're told about NFL wide receivers, Deontay Harris should not be a leading receiver on an NFL team. However, he is, and it's with the New Orleans Saints. He is 5'6". He is a prolific return man, but he has also been the New Orleans Saints' most primary and reliable receiving option so far this season. What does that tell you? That tells you that there's room for another receiver to come in like Odell Beckham Jr. and of that caliber to be able to come in and actually make a big difference for this team. But it also tells you that if they can do that with these other receivers that you've seen so far for the New Orleans Saints that are not top-tier talent, what can they do with top-tier talent? You also have a running back that can help shoulder the load, not only in the run game, but also in the passing game. You're not going to be somebody that's going to be completely overwhelmed with targets, although the volume will be there. You still have Alvin Kamara in the backfield to help make plays. And then you also get to be the person that helps keep Alvin Kamara healthy throughout a long 17-game season. Alvin Kamara already reportedly banged up a bit, so you saw the New Orleans Saints move on from Chase Hansen on Tuesday and then bring in another running back just in case. So something to keep an eye out on as we get more of our injury reports and we get into crossover Thursday tomorrow. But that's something that Odell Beckham Jr. gets the opportunity to help with and be helped by. You also get to showcase yourself in a situation to where you're effectively going to be a half-year rental before you hit the market and then try to get a bigger contract up against top defensive back talent. You're not going to be going up against CB2s and CB3s and utilized in those situations where you're not drawing the primary coverage. You're going to draw the primary coverage in New Orleans. So if you're not in that situation, which is on the opposite side in the cons column here, to where if you're saying I want to do the least to get the most, if instead you're trying to showcase yourself against top talent, New Orleans is absolutely the place to go because you're going to draw that top talent. You're going to draw that primary coverage. Doug Mouton's going to talk a little bit more about that as well. And then finally, the Saints are reportedly the only team that tried to trade for Odell Beckham Jr. with the Cleveland Browns at the trade deadline. They have shown how much they want Odell Beckham Jr. to be a part of this system. Now they get the opportunity to be able to go out there and for the first time in Odell Beckham Jr.'s career, he's a free agent. They can bring him to a place where they've already shown, hey, we want you in this system. And that could mean that the New Orleans Saints would also be interested in providing a long-term deal. That could be one of the big differences here too. Does he want a short-term deal to where he can hit the market and go out there and try to make money again next season? Or does he want a longer-term deal, a 2-3-year deal like what New Orleans would have traded for to add him there? New Orleans has shown that they're willing to take on some cap space or some cap hits, although non-guaranteed at the time of the trade, but still willing to take on some of that money in 2022, 2023 to keep him around on what his contract was presently with the Cleveland Browns, with just an adjustment being made for this season so that they can get him under the salary cap. That could mean that the Saints would be willing to offer, him not only just a half a year rental deal, but also maybe an incentive-laden deal going into the next couple of seasons where if this all works out and we're all fine and dandy and happy to move forward, then we have these things that can kick in and give you a top receiver salary or, a top 15 receiver salary or whatever going into the next 2 seasons. Could be very interesting. The New Orleans Saints, they work the numbers unlike any other team, could find a way to be appealing in that avenue in a long-term conversation in a way that maybe a Kansas City Chiefs or a Green Bay Packers team that hasn't shown that they're as creative with contracts, it can't be. Ultimately, this all comes down to what Odell Beckham Jr. wants and what the New Orleans Saints can provide. Do those two things align? We'll find out. Hometown love, that could be a part of all this as well, that sentimental part of it. But when it comes down to what the New Orleans Saints have to offer on the field, they check most of the boxes. The biggest thing is probably going to be convincing of the quarterback situation. Trevor Siemian, Taysom Hill, whoever it's going to be, and that we'll have to wait and see. So we'll continue to keep you up to date on everything on OBJ Watch. We'll be talking a little bit more about OBJ here as we wrap up the show once Doug Mouton joins us. But first, coming up next, we're going to take a look at Saints film notes, our film study from this week. Where did the New Orleans Saints struggle? What do they need to improve before they get to next week in Nashville? We've got that and much more coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And while the New Orleans Saints are trying to convince OBJ to come to New Orleans, I've got something I barely have to convince you about. It's the Get Upside app. Here, let me just tell you the basics about this, and you're absolutely going to love it. Free app, great place to start. Free app that you can download over on the Apple App Store or on the Google Play Store, wherever it is that you get your apps. And when you use the app and you go to a select gas station that's covered, they're going to give you 25 cents back per gallon every single time that you fill up. That's it. That's the details. Nothing, no weird contracts, nothing, no catches, nothing like that. It's very, very simple. I use it. Luke Braun, a good friend of mine who hosts Locked On Vikings. He's also the co-host on Tuesdays over at Locked On NFL. He uses it. And then actually the best part about it is that when you use it the first time, because I know you're going to go download it, that Get Upside app, make sure you use the promo code TOUCHDOWN so that you can actually get 50 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. 25 cents per gallon after that. You can get it sent directly to your bank account in PayPal or in an Amazon gift card, other brands as well. This does not get any easier, and it's a great way to save money as the gas prices continue to rise. So save yourself a little bit of money with the Get Upside app, 25 cents back per gallon when you fill up. That's the Get Upside app. All right, Who Dat Nation, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day every day. Means so much to be a part of your routine. And hey, if you're listening to today's episode, you haven't listened to Monday and Tuesday, what are you doing, man? Go and check out those other two episodes where we already have you covered. And we've got our crossover Thursday coming up tomorrow with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans as well. But right now, I want to focus just one more time, close the book on the New Orleans Saints upsetting loss 27-25 up against the Atlanta Falcons. Last second loss, even though the Saints had stormed back in a thrilling 18-point comeback to take the lead 25-24. But let's talk about the big thing, which is what did the Saints in this game. And of course, it's big plays given up. And those big plays were given up over the middle of the field quite a bit. You saw vacating linebackers or linebackers vacating spaces, a lot of man coverage in this game that ended up leaving a lot of backs turned and a lot of space open, unfortunately. And therefore, you're going to end up giving up a ton of big plays. And where the New Orleans Saints really struggled in this game were where they were crossing routes over the middle of the field, paired with concepts that also folded in vertical routes. Just gave you a lot of different options for you to be able to take advantage of as a quarterback like Matt Ryan, who was given a lot of time in this game, even though he faced quite a bit of pressure, 18 pressures, not enough to really throw him off of his base. And so the New Orleans Saints ended up giving up a lot over the middle. And then once they started to collapse into the middle, they gave a lot over the top as well. New Orleans Saints, 6 plays given up or surrendered in this one of 20 or more yards. Up next, they've got Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, 2 players that you don't want to mess with when it comes to over the middle on the giving up space over the middle, because they'll eat you up right there. That's kind of their bread and butter in Tennessee. Now, we talked about the pass rush a bit. Pass rush is improving in terms of volume of pressures, but they're not yet really improving when it comes to consistency and impact. Again, 18 pressures in this game, 2 sacks, 2 very timely sacks. Mind you, I will give the New Orleans Saints defense that, but no turnovers generated from pressure, no turnovers generated from sack fumbles, which we saw up against Tampa Bay in the win last week. And so that's something that you still want to see from this New Orleans Saints defense. I'll remind you of the conversation that I had with Cam Jordan during mini camps when we talked about what can this New Orleans Saints do better. And one of the things that he mentioned was causing fumbles when getting to the quarterback. And right now they've been a little inconsistent in the second part of that, which is getting to the quarterback, but they're getting better there. They've had sacks in the last few games, multiple sacks in the last few games, but getting those turnovers, generating those turnovers needs to be a part of what ends up. Sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's making a play on the ball at the right moment. But oftentimes from the sacks that you're seeing from the Saints defense, it's a lot of late in the snap clock. So Matt Ryan is ready to pull the ball down in this game, and there were, tackles at the legs, things like that, that ended up him being able to get away from in a couple of situations, or being able to evade and get out of the pressure path, if you will. So, a lot of those things that aren't them raking at the ball, that aren't them making, impact shots on the upper body, things like that, that would jar the ball loose. Not really seeing that from the Saints pass rush just yet, but you're hoping that they continue to improve. They certainly are when it comes to quantity of pressures. That's something that they've been consistently getting better at over the course of the season. but it's not almost sacks. You're looking for sacks, you're looking for turnovers, you're looking for impact on the game, right? Sometimes that is getting to the quarterback. Sometimes that is just barely getting to the quarterback so that he's forced to have one of those kind of Mac Jones pick sixes that he threw to. No. His pick six was off of a receiver's hands. But another interception that he threw to PJ Williams back in the week 3 win for the New Orleans Saints when Caden Ellis was in his face with pressure up the middle. Sticking with the defense, the run defense, though, fantastic in this game. We talked about how good Marcus Davenport was there. We talked about how impactful David Onyemata has been since he's returned back in there over these last 2 games. The Saints right now, first in terms of yards allowed per attempt on defense, only 3.2 yards allowed per run so far this season, and they're the number 2 team right now in ESPN's team run stop win rate. They've been absolutely phenomenal on the ground. That's not going to change anytime soon because this defensive line has kind of reached its final form at this point. As long as Payton Turner can stay healthy, as long as Marcus Davenport can stay healthy, you've got both of those guys out there with Cam Jordan, along with David Onyemata, who the Saints missed sorely early on in the season, although they still excelled against the run game no matter what. But he gives you the interior pressure, which you're going to see more and more of throughout the season. All of that makes massive impact for the New Orleans Saints as they continue to move forward. Okay, let's wrap up here with the offensive side, starting with the offensive line. Getting this offensive line back together with one small adjustment has actually been really, really impactful for the New Orleans Saints. Remember a couple of weeks ago, we were sort of looking at them as a team that was around the bottom half or right in the middle of the NFL when it comes to pass block win rate. But the difference between where they were to the top was only a matter of a handful of a percent or a handful of percentage points, I guess you can say. So 5% better, they would have been number 2. Well, now they're number 2 in the NFL when it comes to pass block win rate. And that comes with this offensive line being fully back together with one sort of change, which is Andrew Speed is out for the season. James Hurst is in at left guard, and he has played incredibly well there. Up against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, remember, the Atlanta Falcons only had 4 active defensive linemen in this game, so it was easy to wear this defensive line out, which is why you saw the run game working quarters 1 through 4, but unfortunately not being able to be relied upon because of the deficit, point deficit at one point. But less than 10 pressures allowed in this game, and again, James Hurst playing very well at left guard. So number 2 now in the NFL in team pass block win rate, but it doesn't stop there when it comes to the team. It comes to individual players as well. Cesar Ruiz at guard, Ryan Ramczyk at tackle, and Eric McCoy at center are all top 5 in their respective positions in pass block win rate on an individual level as well. So it comes down to just more than just the team performing well in unison. You've got outstanding players and top 5 players in this very important metric of pass block win rate in 3 positions at this point. So really, really, really fantastic stuff from all of the Saints offensive linemen. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about the Saints run game, which continues to trend up. The Saints run game was phenomenal early on, but unfortunately they had to go away from it with the 18-point deficit that they ended up with over on the defensive side. Red zone defense being a big part of it. Red zone pressure. That's another place, actually, going back to the defensive line very quickly, where the Saints can really, really improve when it comes to pressure from the defensive line. It's not giving a ton of time to be able for receivers to be able to improvise and quarterbacks to be able to improvise in the red zone. That was where there was a big difference between what the Saints have done so far this season and what the Saints weren't able to do up against Atlanta in this one. So something to keep in mind there and something to watch, because the Tennessee Titans next week, who they'll be facing, or later on this week, I guess, that they'll be facing, last week were perfect 3 of 3 against the Rams in the red zone. It was a big part of why they won that game, even though the offense wasn't perfect. Only ran for 69 yards. I don't believe they passed for over 200 yards, but they had a game much like what the New Orleans Saints had opening up the season, where they didn't need a ton of yards because they were scoring in the red zone. Saints can't let that happen again. What else can the Saints not let happen, or what do the Saints need to improve going into this upcoming game against the Tennessee Titans based upon what we saw last week when the loss against the Atlanta Falcons? Well, got to keep the run game going quarters 1 through 4. So a big part of that is going to be not giving up a big deficit so you can continue to focus on the run game. Saints are phenomenal on the ground. Need to be able to focus their offense there. Need to be able to generate takeaways as well. We're going to hear from it. We're going to hear about it in just a moment from Doug Mouton, how important takeaways have been for this New Orleans Saints team in the last 3 seasons. Pressure has to step up, particularly in the red zone and in key situations, 3rd downs, 4th downs when teams are going for it, 2nd and longs, or even 1st and longs following a penalty, and then of course in the red zone. So pressure's got to keep coming up there. And again, it's not just about quantity. It's about the quality of those pressures as well. Are they consistently getting the pressure, and what is that pressure leading to? And then finally, big plays. Got to limit them, but you also got to produce them. Convert some of those third downs that you had drops on in the first half. We might be talking about a very different outcome for this New Orleans Saints team, but then you also don't give up as many big plays. Again, 6 20-plus yard plays given up in the passing game by the New Orleans Saints in this one. Can't give those up, but you got to be able to produce them over on the opposite side. So those are a couple of things. We'll talk much more about this game tomorrow with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans as we get into our crossover Thursday, and then, of course, keys to victory on Friday. So make sure you come back for those for more information on the Tennessee Titans and the New Orleans Saints as they travel to Nashville this weekend. Coming up next, we're going to be joined by our good friend Doug Mouton from WWL-TV. It is WWL Wednesday after all. We're going to talk a little bit about what the Saints do if they get Odell Beckham Jr., what they do if they don't. There's another option out there that just hit waivers that could be very interesting. And then, of course, what the Saints have to do to get another win and improve to 6-3. Remember, we're talking about this team like they're a 1-7 team. They're 5-3 right now. So what do they have to do to improve to 6-3 up against the Tennessee Titans? We'll talk about all of that and much more with Doug Mouton here in just a moment as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. What I'm going to need you to do is head over to built.com so that you can try out these fantastic protein bars, the best protein bars on the market. And look, right now, if you haven't tried these yet, you are missing out. They say that it's a protein bar, but it tastes like a candy bar. It does not taste like one of those chalky, kind of really just regretful protein bars that you can go and grab at the store. Don't worry about all of that chalk, wax, just plain kind of gross stuff that you have to choke down. Built Bar is soft. It's covered in 100% real chocolate. When you bite into it, you know that you're eating something different. It's more than just an experience. It's something you're going to enjoy. In fact, you swear you're eating that candy bar. They're low in calorie, low in fats, low in sugar, but they're high in protein. So you get all the healthy benefits and purely delicious in so many different flavors. Coconut, raspberry, mint brownie, some of my favorites. A ton of different flavors for you to check out. But they also have a bunch of limited time flavors that are going to be rotating throughout the month, 3 to 4 days at a time. So make sure you check the website often at built.com because you don't want to miss out. And while you're there, grab yourself a box of Built Bars and use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, everybody, it is a Wednesday here on Locked On Saints, so we are right back with WWL Wednesday, joined this week by Sports Director of WWL-TV, Doug Mouton at DMouton WWL on Twitter. Doug, thanks so much for joining us again.
Oh, anytime, Ross.
Always appreciate having you on, man. And look, there's big news right now that we should absolutely dive into. Maybe the biggest story going on right now across the NFL. All eyes on Odell Beckham Jr. At the time of us recording this, he is presently unsigned. Lots of teams being, thrown out there as being in the mix. So let's just kind of run with the fantasy for a moment here. And let's say that Odell Beckham Jr. signs with the New Orleans Saints. What does he bring to this team?
Well, look, I think anybody who's seen him play knows the answer to that. I guess the first question would be, is he 100%? Mm-hmm. If he said he were close to 100%, if he said he were over 50%, he's instantly becomes the best receiver on your roster. I did a graphic for my 4 takeaways Monday night. The Saints do not have any wide receivers in the top 50 in production in the NFL so far this season. They just aren't getting any help at wide receiver. Beckham would instantly become your number one guy. He'd become your focal point of your offense. He'd be the guy who would open things up for Alvin Kamara and vice versa, Kamara for him. Now, look, from Beckham's standpoint, the disadvantage would be he would see the primary coverage from pretty much every team immediately roll towards him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Beckham would make the Saints instantly more dangerous on offense, and the Saints are in the game and fighting for it. Somebody asked me today what I think the chances are that the Saints would land him, and I said probably below 20%. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe between 15 and 20%. But I'll say this, there's a lot of teams in there, and I'm not sure any single team has a greater chance than the Saints. It's just that there's so many teams involved. And if he decides he wants to go play with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay or Russell Wilson in Seattle, you could certainly understand that. Look, Trevor Siemian's done a nice job, but he's not exactly the guy that's going to make you say, oh, I got to go play with that guy. Whereas, especially in a 1 year, if he does a 1 year deal and then test free agency, 1 year with Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson makes sense, but
Mhm.
also so does coming to New Orleans, where he could be the guy on a good team and be the guy.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, a good team, because this is still a 5-3 football team. We tend to talk about them after a disappointing loss like they're a 1-7 team, but they're not, right? They're still a team with a lot of talent all around. So if the Saints don't get Odell Beckham Jr. back, what do they need to do to sort of bolster the receiving core, especially with the potential now that they could end up losing Deontay Harris for a couple of games?
Yeah, and look, you mentioned Josh Reynolds. I saw that you tweeted
Mhm.
that. I like Josh Reynolds. He's
Same.
26 and he's big. He's a quality NFL target. He was terrific with the Rams. Kind of got lost in Tennessee. They released him. If you don't win the Beckham sweepstakes, that's a guy out there that I think instantly becomes your most talented receiver. Especially, we're expecting the Deontay Harris DUI suspension to be coming now that the legal case is over. Josh Reynolds is a guy that can help. Look, the one guy that wasn't involved enough in the offense this past week against the Falcons, I think, was Taysom Hill. I think he's a guy that is a dynamic with the ball guy. The Saints are 31st in the NFL in yards after catch. They just don't have any dynamic guys with the ball other than Alvin Kamara. And I think Taysom Hill needs to be more involved than he was. But yeah, I still think this is obviously they're 5-3. They played two division leaders and they've beaten them both soundly. The one metric across everything that always plays out for the Saints is turnover margin. Saints lost the turn. Now, look, since 2019, they're still have a winning record when they lose the turnover margin. They lost it. It was 1-0 against the Falcons. They didn't win that game, but they're closer to 500 when it's even, or if they win, or if they lose the turnover margin. They win the turnover margin. In the last 3 years, they're 17-1. It's the one metric that has played out and continues to play out. If they can get turnovers, which obviously they didn't do against the Falcons, they can beat anybody. They've proven that. They've beaten Tampa and Green Bay this year without Michael Thomas and without Odell Beckham. So they certainly can play with anybody. Margin for error is tiny, and they got to get turnovers. But they're a good team. They're a playoff team without Beckham and with Trevor Siemian. Hopefully, you can be a little better than that if you could land a guy like Beckham.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So turnover margin, certainly a factor going into Sunday's game up against the Derrick Henry-less Tennessee Titans. What do the Saints need to do to walk away with a W in that one?
Yeah, look, Tennessee right now is the number 1 seed in the AFC. They've been terrific. Their defense was unbelievably good this past weekend. But yeah, the Saints are going to have to get turnovers. They're going to have to run the ball. This game played out so perfectly for the Saints, the way they were able to run the ball. If they could have just caught some of those third down plays, if they didn't have the maddening number of drops, I think the Saints could have been ahead by 2 touchdowns on the Falcons in the first half, the way they were running the ball. I'm super curious how this game plays out. Tennessee's been good. It's an upside down year where the Saints have been really good against good teams and really bad against bad teams.
Right.
So I given that pattern, I expect the Saints to play well, and I guess we'll see what happens. They have to find somebody to make a play on offense that isn't Alvin Kamara. But look, I like the Saints' chances. I'm not saying I would bet on the Saints to win, but the Saints absolutely can beat Tennessee if they get a couple of turnovers and do things right. I mean, the Saints will absolutely be in the game.
Yeah, certainly hard to count them out. And hey, they've been pretty remarkable on the road as of late as well. So that's
really good on the road. Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
that's another
That's a
factor
Sean
in there for
Payton
sure.
thing. His team, they're almost better when they get a little bit of a bunker mentality, and that happens on the road.
Absolutely. Doug, we appreciate you coming through. Anybody you can follow along with Doug over at WWL-TV as well as at Mouton of WWL. We appreciate seeing you, buddy.
Anytime, Ross.
All right, family, don't forget tomorrow is Crossover Thursday. You don't want to miss it. Tyler Roldan, Locked on Titans, coming through so we could talk Saints versus Titans. Going to be a ton of fun. Love working with Tyler, so very excited to get this crossover out to you. That'll probably drop Wednesday night, Thursday morning for our Crossover Thursday episode. And then, of course, on Friday, we've got our keys to victory to wrap it all up before the big game on Sunday. Appreciate you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go and check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock, former NFL scout Matt Williamson, get you everything you need to know across the NFL in less than 30 minutes. A great way to keep up to date on Odell Watch as well. We'll be back for you on that and much more here throughout the week. But for everything in between, don't forget to throw me a follow on Twitter at RawJackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.